everybody, and welcome to another episode of Film Seizure, now playing. My name is Geoff Arbuckle, and with me, as always, are Jason Oliver and Chuck Moore. Oh, wait, actually, nope, I'm sorry. They are not with me, as always. They're taking the week off this week. Chuck is doing a little bit of traveling, and Jason's got a little bit of business to handle on his end, so I'm doing this now playing solo because there are 4 movies that I definitely want to touch upon. And, well, actually, I guess there are 2 movies I really want to review, and there are 3 movies that I actually wanted to just kind of catch up on from past months because of the way our schedule worked out and everything. It ended up, last month we had our best of 2024 episode. Back in February and March, things were just kind of cleaning up some of the stuff from the end of last year and so forth. So there are a few things that were released earlier this year that I did at least want to touch upon. The movies that we're going to be talking about, or that I'm going to be talking about this week, the ones that I want to do a little bit more kind of catch up on, kind of playing a little bit of catch up on, are How to Make a Killing, Send Help, the Sam Raimi movie starring Rachel McAdams and Dylan O'Brien, and then wanted to also catch up on The Bride. There's a lot of people out there on the internet who have a lot of opinions about The Bride. I'll give mine because you're going to hear that sound probably a lot when I'm talking about that movie. But the 2 newer films that I definitely wanted to touch upon a little bit more, and there is another new one that Chuck and I will definitely be sure to talk about in 2 weeks when we have another Now Playing and we're all back together on. But the 2 that I really wanted to make sure to review, because I think they are 2 very, very interesting movies from a couple of different technical angles, but also one is just probably an early contender for potentially being a Best Picture Oscar nominee. And those movies are Undertone, the horror film being released by A24 currently, and the blockbuster that's currently out, the movie that's really kind of jump-starting the box office for the year, is Project Hail Mary. But I'm going to start with Undertone because Undertone is one of those horror movies that I think I really want to get to see in a darkened theater with other people reacting, because it's one of those kind of slow burn movies that really kind of puts you on edge because you're kind of waiting for the thing to jump out, right? Or for the moment that really kind of sends the tingles up your spine. Now, what we have here is a woman by the name of Evie. She is, she's kind of from this really Catholic family. It's not exactly stated exactly what happened to her father, but her mother is currently dying of what we assume to be cancer. At least I don't fully remember if that actually was directly, stated that that's what her mother is dying of. But her mother is basically in a comatose state. She lies in bed all day. Evie takes care of everything for her. And then she, basically does all of the important business of taking care of her sick mother. Her mother, really is just kind of barely there, barely hanging on. It is stated that, Evie will know when her mother is about to pass away because you'll start to hear the death rattle in her breathing. Evie wants to be very matter of fact about this because she's the one who has to basically bear this burden. But she does this podcast with a friend who, is implied that lives overseas. Now the movie was made in Canada. I will assume that Evie is either, lives in Canada or, possibly someplace else. But, she connects with her friend, Justin, who you only ever hear the voice of. In fact, there are only 3 people that you technically see during the during this movie. You see Evie, you see her mother, who only goes by Mama because you don't get to know too much more about her. Everything is kind of through Evie's eyes. And you do see the body of the doctor who's caring for Evie, for Evie's mom. And everything else is almost entirely Evie in this old, dark house. Most of the time she is up in the middle of the night because that's when she can call Justin. They can do their podcast, and the podcast is all about spooky stuff. Justin's kind of into the whole idea of, the hauntings or these spooky kind of stories about unexplained and supernatural concepts. And Evie is there to be the skeptic. It's a very kind of interesting podcast because you have one person who's a believer, you have one person who's a skeptic, but they get along really, really, really well. But Justin received an email with these kind of undescribed audio clips. There are 10 of them in all. Even the way that they are file named, utilizing the number within the spelled out word for the number, is kind of interesting and a little bit, unsettling in a way, because it just doesn't really explain what it is that they are doing or what is in what these recordings are all about. And so what this whole thing is that these are 10 recordings that detail something that happened to a couple who were expecting a baby. And there's this whole kind of demonic thing that kind of plays into like some of the things that you hear in the recordings, some of the stuff that is said because the woman talks in her sleep, something that the husband's always known about, but it becomes worse and worse and worse as they are expecting their child. You also find out that like as each recording passes, something stranger and creepier is happening in it. And it is seemingly following to Evie's home where she is. And we find out there's a very specific reason why that happens. I'm not going to give too much away about it because it's kind of one of those things where, yes, this is a very slow burn, but each scene kind of stacks on top of itself. And I think the one thing about this, there's two things that I think this movie does exceptionally well. And, there are things that the movie does well already. I mean, like I said, there's really only two people that you see in the entire movie, and only one of them is ever actually doing things. The other one's comatose in bed. Though there are times in which you kind of get flashes of maybe this person's not so comatose, but it's hard to tell exactly if that's really happening or if it's part of a nightmare, because again, all of this stuff is happening in a dark house in the middle of the night where everything else is quiet. And that's the first thing that the movie does exceptionally well. It has excellent sound design. The audio files move around the theater. When she puts on her headphones, it cancels out any of the house's ambient noise. It is a very cool movie to see in a theater. And at the very least, if you have a good home theater sound system, it's going to be a really kind of neat experience as the sounds kind of move around you. There are also, the other thing that it does exceptionally well is the one thing that I always, always, always want horror movies like this, where there's spookiness and stuff that's perhaps demonic or something that might be welcomed into into the character's world from something. But this is where, there's the way it's filmed, there's a lot of like negative space. Evie will be shot, and it's Nina Kiri who plays Evie. She may be shot where she's all the way over on like the right hand side of the frame. And then there's all this negative space to her left. And you're almost constantly looking and almost fearfully looking for something that's going to be creeping around in the shadows in that negative space. And I love stuff like that. And so, this is a movie that was directed by Ian, I believe it's pronounced Tuason. And, it's a really small budget. This was a Canadian production, like I said. He's largely been doing short films. He is, it looks like, tapped to write and direct the 8th Paranormal Activity movie. Makes perfect sense after a movie like this. But he does a really good job with, kind of, if you like slow burns, you're going to be engaged with this and you are going to be kind of sucked into it, and it's going to be unsettling. And it does that sort of thing kind of like Blair Witch, where there's an ending that you're kind of gripping the seat and trying to figure out, it's like, did that really just happen? Is this something that is there something else here that we're missing out on? But it just uses all of those spooky things really, really well. If you're a big fan of slow burns, I definitely recommend Undertone. But maybe the one movie that I recommend to almost any type of audience, because it is such a crowd pleaser, is the next movie I want to talk about, and that's Project Hail Mary. Now, Project Hail Mary comes from Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, two guys who typically don't necessarily work in live action. They were largely known for doing, like the, I think they do the Spider-Man, Spider-Verse movies. They did Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. They've done the Lego movies and stuff like that. Now, they did make the 21 Jump Street movies back in the 2012 and 2014. So they have done a little bit of live action, but they're largely known for working in the animation field. But one of the things that they are always pretty well known for is having a really pretty solid sensibility in how they work with characters, how they make them kind of more realistic and such. But they're the directors of this movie. The screenplay is by Drew Goddard, based on an Andy Weir novel named Project Hail Mary. Now, Andy Weir wrote the novel for The Martian, which Drew Goddard also adapted. And that, I think, Goddard got nominated for an Oscar for. The Martian was the movie with Matt Damon where he's basically alone on Mars. Well, this movie, Project Hail Mary, is Ryan Gosling kind of alone about 11 light years away from Earth. And, I the whole time I was watching the movie, I really kind of felt good about watching the movie. And I remember watching a review on YouTube of it after seeing it from British film reviewer Mark Kermode. And he mentioned that, this is the type of movie that we might need right now. And I don't know, I suppose that is kind of true. Every now and then there's a movie that comes along that actually is kind of speaking to some present day things in a way that doesn't feel political, but is. The undertone is absolutely undertone. No connection to the movie Undertone, but the undertone to that messaging is political. This is a movie about saving humanity from a very, very real, catastrophic environmental and ecological change that is not on our Earth, but on a solar system level. And so you have that element to it, right? It's the idea of what can we do to save ourselves? What is it that it's going to take people to do to save ourselves? And this movie's kind of told in two different time frames. It's told in the present, where Ryan Gosling wakes up from a self-induced, medical-induced coma that for the space flight, with little memory of what he is doing and where he's at and why he's there. He kind of knows a little bit more about himself than he remembers why he's there. And so there's a little bit of time paid to that. But he also discovers that there's supposed to be two other astronauts with him. Both of them have died from something going wrong on the ship. And so he wakes up and he's having to piece together, and that's where the movie flashes back. We find out that this guy who plays Ryland Grace he is a doctor, and he is an exceptionally overqualified middle school teacher. And you get the impression that he's a middle school teacher in kind of an advanced school of sorts. But he was recruited because he wrote a particular type of paper about what the necessities of the condition of life could be in space or on other planets or in other systems or in other environments. And he gets recruited by a woman that's played by Sandra Hüller, who she basically says, look, there was this thing that was sent up that was that went in between the sun and Venus. It discovered that there is this strange radiation activity that happens in there, and it is effectively killing the sun. And what it's doing is it's basically eating away at what makes up the sun. And she suggests that within 30 years, there will be enough people dead from the change that's happened because the sun is growing colder and dimmer that humanity will be forever doomed. Even if they learn how to deal with it, there will be so much mass death that it's doomed. And so they're putting the project together, and through a series of events, he ends up on the ship. And he is not a very brave person. He is not an astronaut. And so the way he ended up on the ship, like I said, there's a series of events that takes place. But he goes out there, and because they found one star that is about 11 light years away that is not being affected by these, what they call astrophage, which are these little microscopic things that eat the solar radiation. And it's not long after the ship gets into position that he discovers he's not the only person in the universe that's trying to figure this out. Another being in a different spaceship with a similar situation, not necessarily a astronaut, but more of a mechanical engineer, is the last survivor of its spaceship, and it's just this little 5-legged rock guy, and they end up becoming friends over this. And we find out that the Rocky, as Grace calls him, is really good at building things. Like I said, he's kind of a mechanical engineer on the alien spaceship, and his race, which are, effectively, I think they're called, now I can't remember exactly what they were, Iridians or Iridians, maybe Iridians, I think is what they were called. But the rock people, they have a different set of circumstances that they need for life, but they also don't know some of the stuff that like astrophysics that humanity does. So Ryland Grace has something that that Rocky doesn't know that much about, and Rocky can do things that Grace can't do. And so it's a movie where, as these two different beings from completely different societies, different planets, different backgrounds, different cultures, they can work together. They realize that they are both doing something the other can't. And so what it really comes down to is you're watching a movie about how people from different backgrounds can enrich certain circumstances, can enrich certain situations in which you need to work together to be able to survive. And, they figure out what the other needs in order to be successful on this mission. And it is such a pleasant movie. It's such a nice movie. The whole time I'm watching it, I'm smiling. Yes, I'm laughing at some of the jokes that are happening. It is a phenomenally good looking movie. The special effects are fantastic. It's, you've got these kind of really never before seen kind of things like a big green gaseous planet that's circling the star that they're at. And, there's a scene in which Grace has to collect some astrophage to study and to try to figure out, well, what can we do to successfully, combat this in both of our solar systems. And it transitions into more of like an infrared vision. And you see this it looks like he's standing in a snow globe. And it's such a beautiful scene that it's just so scientifically cool, or at least science fiction cool. It's very much reminiscent of movies like Silent Running, where you have a person that is basically the lone person on this ship, and he interacts with something that does not have human features, and you kind of get to know both sides and you like both sides. And then it's also the type of science fiction movie where the science part is not that important. Like, I'm sure Neil deGrasse Tyson has a hell of a lot to say about the science element of it, because he gets to a place that's 11 light years away, and there's sense that he will be able to get back to Earth, and it will not be that not that long it would take to travel those types of distances with our current science and so on. Whatever. I'm sure there's a lot that science people can say about that. And yes, some of the science does seem like, okay, well, we got to at least do that so that we can get this movie to this point, or we have to at least be able to agree on this to be able to move forward with the plot. Whatever. It's not the point. Really good science fiction is not determined by the accuracy of the science. It is placing real life problems and couching it into a story that seems, that tells that basically gives the moral of the story in a different setting, in a different way, in a different concept that, almost more like hypothetical type of way, right? So in this, like with Star Trek, it was, you have a lot of science fiction-y type of stuff going on. You're flying through space or whatever, but it's talking about social issues at the end of the day. It's talking about how to treat, coming across different types of things, and and how to deal with conflict, and so on and so forth. And that's really what Project Hail Mary is all about. It's all about taking that really simplistic idea that, hey, something is wrong in our ecology or in our environment. How do we fix that? And then coupling that with how can we work together with things that we don't see any similarities with. And so the whole idea of how diversity, and the diversity of thought and the diversity of skill, let alone the obvious diversity of rock creature and person, the two people that don't look anything alike, forget about that. It's that skill that comes in. And, it's a really, really pleasant and wonderfully made movie. And there is a phenomenal scene in one of the flashbacks where Sandra Hüller is doing a karaoke performance of Sign of the Times by Harry Styles that is so important to that moment. It humanizes her. It kind of puts a little bit of, kind of the over, kind of places over the top the, hey, we've got to be one group of people working towards this solution, because, there may not be a tomorrow if this doesn't work out. And it's just a great scene. It's just a wonderful moment in the movie. And it's just one of many wonderful moments in the movie. My only thing that I could say is that maybe the movie's about 15 minutes too long. But to be honest with you, I was bought in, and I was into it the entire 2.5 hour runtime. It's such a pleasant experience to watch. And if you can see it in IMAX, or if you can see it on the big screen, I saw it in the Dolby Auditorium at AMC. It was beautiful to look at. It's wonderful to hear. You have laughs. You kind of get invested. in the characters, and you don't want to see anything bad happen to anybody. And it's just a really great and really fun movie. And like I said, I do think it has a excellent chance of being kind of, every year there's at least one or two what I call populist votes for Best Picture. Last year, F1 was certainly the movie that fit that scheme. This year, I think Project Hail Mary is the one. I think it will be nominated in some of the technical categories as well. And one last thing I will say about this movie. One of the things that I really loved about the look of the movie, it reminded me of a lot of movies that would have been made in the 70s or in the early 80s. There were parts of the movie, parts of the ship that reminded me of like the kind of the lived in, or the way it was lit, kind of feel and look of movies like 2010 or Alien, where it looks like a real place that people are going to be living on and living alone on at times. But it's also shot in a way that does feel a lot more realistic, a lot more tangible than a lot of other science fiction or action movies are made these days. So if that's another, if you like the idea of like this kind of practical looking, like everything looks real and everything looks like something that people actually physically live in or live on, and kind of, especially they live alone on. That's another thing as far as the set design is also really, really good in the movie. So, definitely my highest recommendation of this entire episode is going to go to Project Hail Mary. I think it's a movie that has such a wide appeal to it. And Ryan Gosling is just, by all accounts, he's a good dude, and he's always fun and always interesting to watch in a movie. So there goes Project Hail Mary. All right. And now let's do a little bit of catch up for movies earlier in the year that I saw. First, I guess I'll start with Send Help. Now, Send Help is the new, or the most recent, Sam Raimi movie. I believe it was the first time in like 15 years he's made an R-rated movie. Maybe it's been longer than that. But, this is the movie with, Rachel McAdams and Dylan O'Brien. Basically put like, Rachel McAdams is, she spent her entire professional career and her entire adult life effectively working for a corporate, working as a corporate strategist for this company. She was beloved by the company, or by the guy who ran the company, whether he was the guy who founded the company or just the CEO, whatever the case may be. She's always been, she's kind of been working her way up the ladder, and effectively wanting to get into the executive class, basically become a VP or become a president of one of the branches of the company. And when the guy died, his son, played by Dylan O'Brien, takes over, and she thinks at this point, because that basically frees up the a spot in the executive side of things, she thinks that she's basically going to get what her mentor, the original CEO, basically promised her, which was, a spot as a vice president. And the son basically gives that to one of his dude bro friends, and basically trapping her into a dead end position. If you ever worked for a corporation, in that kind of world, man, does this happen a lot. But, she doesn't know the people that obviously, knows the son, and, and she's a middle-aged woman. They don't see her as very pretty. They think of her as being kind of, annoying. She is, socially awkward, all of that. Well, she gets invited along with the rest of the executives to this overseas thing, and there's a plane crash, and it basically kills everyone except for the new CEO, the dude bro son, and her. And she's a big fan of Survivor. In fact, she has been, when the plane accident happens, all of the other Dude Bro executives are laughing over her Survivor tape that they somehow unearthed. And, but she kind of has the last laugh here because she knows what's poisonous, how to basically live on nothing, and how to build a shelter and all of that stuff. So, the tables kind of reverse here, or kind of turn on the Dude Bro kid. And, so, she knows, she basically is keeping him alive and basically able to use that as a power reversal. And, there's moments of tension, there's moments of horror, there's moments of comedy in this movie. I think it's a very good movie. I think it highlights what makes Sam Raimi so likable, particularly in the horror genre, because he does have a sense of humor and is kind of playful in a lot of ways. Rachel McAdams and Dylan O'Brien are very likable, incredibly watchable, and that's really helpful that they are so likable and watchable because you mostly have just the two of them to watch. But they aren't necessarily supposed to be characters that you're supposed to like, but you can kind of understand why they are the way they are. You understand that O'Brien's character has been pampered his entire life. He's grown up rich because of his father's success. So he doesn't really have any concept of normal life or working for anything. It's not an excuse necessarily to treat people the way he does, but you can kind of understand why he is effectively helpless in this situation. You also understand McAdams' character in a way because she makes a particular choice in her life. You can kind of understand why she makes a choice or makes that choice earlier in her life the way she did, but it does leave enough of a crack in the door to basically make you kind of doubt her or not like her fully or trust her at least. And so there is enough there that you can kind of understand where things are headed there. Some of the more thrilling scenes, some of the more kind of knockdown, drag out stuff that happens between these two characters on this island, it does have that kind of playful Sam Raimi element to it. So it is a movie that I had a lot of fun watching. I think if there's anything that, there are going to be certain elements of it that miles may vary for some people. And I think one of those moments will be the very end of the movie and how you get to that kind of final act or to that climax. And then the aftermath of that climax might be something that people might waver a little bit on. I think generally though, if you like Sam Raimi stuff, you're going to have a lot of fun with this movie. And I think that's the most important thing with it. All right, next up is How to Make a Killing. Now, How to Make a Killing comes from John Patton Ford. He is basing this movie on loosely on Israel Rank, the autobiography of a criminal, which was itself loosely based on Kind Hearts and Coronets. That's a movie we've covered here on Film Seizure. That's why I wanted to make sure that it was discussed here, because we did do this movie on Film Seizure. It's one of the oldest movies that we ever covered here because it's from the late 40s. Kind Hearts and Coronets was the movie that Alec Guinness played like several different members of this family that this guy is basically bumping off. And the movie follows effectively the same concept, right? This movie, you have Glenn Powell, who himself is a perfectly fine casting. You have the right guy to be that you can really kind of get behind. Now, would I wish that he had played the family members in a more comedic turn? Yes, but at the same time, here's a guy he's your focal point for this movie, right? He's good looking, he's smart, he's funny, he's charming, all of that good stuff. So you can kind of follow him through the movie. And this is the story. He plays Beckett Redfellow. And then the Redfellows were a family that is exceptionally rich. You assume on Long Island, because a lot of this movie takes place in New York City. And it's a family of excess, basically. And there's a whole family tree here. And his mother was kicked out of the family for being pregnant with him at the age of 18 or 19 or whatever it is. And, the Redfellow patriarch is played by Ed Harris. He kicks the mother out, who is, let's see here. That is, who is, Mary Redfellow, played by Nell Williams. She gets kicked out of the family, but she tells Beckett, as she is basically dying of cancer, when he's still young enough to where when she dies, he's going to go through the orphanage, side of things. But she tells him that they're part of this family. There is an inheritance that is due to him. She still wanted him to be raised in some refinement, even though she had to work multiple jobs to do that. Through that, he meets Julia, who, as a grown-up, is played by Margaret Qualley. He had a big crush on her, but then when his mother died, when Mary died, he basically had to lose all of that refinement and basically go through the system. And when he is an adult, he runs into Julia again, and she basically is like, hey, whatever happened to your inheritance? And he's like, well, it's still there, but he's working as kind of a lowly shopkeep at a tailor. And so he decides, after seeing her after so many years, that, you know what, I'm going to get my inheritance one way or another. And that's the same story as Kind Hearts and Coronets. He kills his way through the family, but along the way, he meets a woman that was with one of his cousins that he ends up falling in love with after he kills his cousin. And that's played by Jessica Henwick. She plays Ruth. And I actually found myself really liking her maybe the most, because she is kind of a pure character. But there are times, and there's a tension there that I was feeling, that she might get seduced by the high society stuff once he starts to work his way up through the Redfellow family. And I was most worried that she was going to end up becoming kind of a shitty person because of all of the excess that he can now give her. But, so she's kind of like this like the last tether of saying, hey, Beckett, maybe you don't have to do everything you're doing. And especially because after he kills his first cousin, his uncle comes along and says, hey, I've always felt bad about the way our father treated my sister, your mother, and I want to give you a job in finance. And it basically gives him everything he needs. He does not need to do the rest of the plot. And he actually gets a father figure out of it, something he never had, because the father figure was low class, was this kind of what his grandfather thought was this low class servant person that was at a party. And that's who impregnated his mother. And so, you get this kind of father figure and you think, oh man, it's like, there is a kind of an element there where it's like, come on, Becky, you don't have to go any further than this. And so that becomes kind of interesting. Now, I will say that while I don't agree with a lot of the negative reviews, it didn't get very good reviews, How to Make a Killing. And I don't fully understand why that is, because I had a fun time watching the movie. I don't know if maybe it is one of those situations where people didn't really fully understand what the movie was, or what it was kind of based on, or if they've even seen Kind Hearts and Coronets. I don't know. I'm not going to make assumptions on people. I mean, I would hope that most reviewers have seen Kind Hearts and Coronets, but I will say that I had a fun time with the movie, enough to say I wasn't sorry that the movie got made, or that I saw the movie, or that, while there were some elements where it's like, I don't fully understand Julia's whole thing. As much as I enjoy watching Margaret Qualley for very shallow reasons. I can't say that she makes the best of movies. But in this case, I don't fully understand her character's motivations entirely. There's a very surface level understanding what she's doing, but I don't fully understand why she wasn't more upfront with, what she wants from Beckett, because there is something that she wants and it does play out in the end, but I don't fully understand it. Either way, I will say that generally, I liked the Jessica Henwick character. I liked the Glenn Powell lead in this. I liked Bill Camp, who plays the uncle that kind of acts as a surrogate father to Beckett after he kind of starts his process of kind of going through the family. I like those things. There are funny moments in the movie. There are things in it that I do appreciate, that I did have fun with. I still will say, if you want to see the best version of the story, go seek out Kind Hearts and Coronets. It is a bitingly funny satire of wealth and power and what people will do to get to that. Even if it means plowing through their family, that's a better movie. But How to Make a Killing is fine for what it is, an upgraded version or an updated version of Kind Hearts and Coronets. And it's, the lead is cast very well. And it's hard for me to dislike Glenn Powell in most of the things that he's ever done. All right. Lastly, let's talk about The Bride. Now, this is the movie that seems to be almost manufactured division on this movie. There's a certain element of the internet that the moment that a movie is very out front with its messaging, in this case, this is a feminist allegory of some sort. I say of some sort not to dismiss it, but to kind of highlight one of the problems that the movie has. But Maggie Gyllenhaal, who made this movie, she wrote it and directed it. And she based it largely on on elements of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And that's what this is. This is a Bride of Frankenstein movie. I guess it's maybe more based on James Whale's Bride of Frankenstein than it really is based on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein book. And from what I understand, the idea was like, there's this movie called Bride of Frankenstein from 1936 or 1935, whichever year it is. And it is, while considered one of the very best of the Universal classic films, largely because it crosses so many genres, even to the point of almost slapstick comedy. Maggie Gyllenhaal's issue with it was that here's a movie that's called Bride of Frankenstein. The whole movie's about giving Frankenstein somebody that can be his equal in the form of a woman. And she shows up in the final 2 minutes of the movie and then dies. Yes, that is kind of the twist of The Bride of Frankenstein. But she saw that as something that she could work with, where she could make this movie where it is more around the idea of being this concept of how women can be viewed in the world, or how they can be kind of a side note, or a, just kind of a throwaway element of life and of entertainment and of certain genres of movies. And I get that. And this is a movie where, the character of Frankenstein's monster, played by Christian Bale, goes to for a lack of a better term, a mad scientist played by Annette Bening, which I thought was an interesting casting. She certainly looks the part of the Dr. Pretorius character in Bride of Frankenstein. She's kind of got the frizzy hair. She's kind of kooky in her way. She's almost too, and there is kind of an old school Frankenstein movie element where, she initially doesn't want to help the monster make a bride or to do anything with this kind of reanimation story, but becomes almost seduced by it to the point where she has to do it because she wants to see where this goes. There's the living proof of the monster standing in front of her. So, there's kind of a kind of a classic nod to that element of the old Universal Frankenstein movies. But where the movie really kind of is interesting, and I do think kind of does succeed, is the idea that you can update the Frankenstein story, in this case, make it a little bit more of a Bonnie and Clyde type of movie, because you have these two things that are going to be rejected by society no matter what they do. They're monsters, right? And so they are going to have to fight against the system. I think that is interesting. I think it is far more interesting that Maggie Gyllenhaal takes chances with this movie than telling a straight Frankenstein movie. We just got a Frankenstein movie last year. We don't need another Frankenstein movie. So she kind of twists it a little bit into this kind of mad love type of movie where you have somebody who is desperate for companionship with somebody who is desperate or who had a role in her living life that was almost kind of desperately wanting to tell the story of these other women that she knew that were getting basically steamrolled by this powerful mobster. Okay, kind of interesting starting point. I generally do like Jessie Buckley's performance as the bride. I generally like Annette Bening's casting as this kind of mad scientist in kind of a Dr. Pretorius sort of way. I generally like Christian Bale's portrayal of Frank, or, he says he takes his father's name, so they call him Frank in the movie, but he's the Frankenstein monster. I generally like some of the side characters. I especially like the Penelope Cruz character, who I think is more on point with Maggie Gyllenhaal's thesis of why she's making this movie about a time in the world where women were looked past and not necessarily taken seriously. And, this Penelope Cruz character wants to be a detective, but by accident of birth, her gender, her sex, prevents her from being that. But she has a partner in Peter Sarsgaard, who is Maggie Gyllenhaal's partner in real life, who is sympathetic to that. Now, he's playing the game by, telling people that she is his secretary. But he asks for her opinion. He asks for her theories on everything. And she does really good cop work. I like that kind of that concept. I think where this movie loses its way a little bit is that it's kind of throwing the kitchen sink at the wall and seeing what sticks. There's musical elements. There's this kind of element of, is Frank effectively what we would call today an incel, somebody who wants the idea of partnership, but doesn't know what to do with women or doesn't really know what to like about women. I think there are times where he is sweet towards the bride, but there are also very serious things that he's preventing her from knowing about why she's alive, why she exists, why she is here. And that is a detriment to the story. Because am I supposed to think of him as somebody who is kind of innocently lying to her about who she was and about how they knew each other before she had to be reanimated? Or is he, nefarious in trying to basically possess her or own her? It's not exactly clear. I don't think it's as clear as it wants to be. what is her role and what she was doing before she died is kind of an interesting story. And I think an important one because it's about women who are being victimized, needing to be, needs justice. And that's all interesting, but I think it buries it under stylistic choices that makes it difficult to fully get that until it has to be told to you. I feel weird about criticizing the movie too much on the level of, is this actually a good feminist movie? Because I'm a guy. Let's get that right out in the open here. Because I do think it's almost a movie that feels 30 years too late in the way it tells its story, because it's very spot on. It's very, obvious what it's trying to do and trying to say and how it goes about it. It's raucous in that way. And I don't know if that's necessarily the best way of presenting some of these ideas to people like me who are just guys. Now, I'm 100% all for feminist movements. But at the same time, I also know how it's going to be received by people like me. Guys, particularly middle-aged guys. So there's some wonkiness there, I think. Generally, though, I still say that this is a marginal thumbs up from me. But I don't think it fully succeeds in everything it wants to do. Do I think that this movie maybe finds an audience down the line as maybe more of a cult classic? Maybe. We'll see. But I think there are plenty of things that I like, particularly, I mean, right now, I don't think Jessie Buckley can go wrong with the way the way she acts in movies. I appreciated her role in how she played it. I appreciated Christian Bale and how he played Frank. I just think that this movie is a little messy. And I think there's enough to like here to where I can say it's a marginal thumbs up. But it's not without its problems. And I think it's going to be one of those things where I don't blame people for really disliking the movie, and I don't blame people for really liking the movie. I think I'm somewhere closer to the exact middle. But again, much like with, How to Make a Killing, am I sad that I saw the movie? No. I much, much rather that this movie exists in this form and being raucous and trying things and being, even if it is sloppy and even if it is repetitive, throughout the course of the movie, I'd rather see this movie try something crazy and wild and take big swings than just another remake of Frankenstein or another, or a remake of The Bride of Frankenstein that plays it much more straight. I'd rather this be raucous like it is, even if it doesn't totally work for me. All right. I think I've said enough. I think you've gotten enough out of one person as opposed to the 3-person perspectives that we normally have whenever we do one of these Now Playing. So let's wrap it up here. Like I said, we do have another Now Playing coming in 2 weeks. I think Chuck and I will have things to say about Ready or Not 2. I definitely want to talk about Lee Cronin's The Mummy, as well as the drama starring Robert Pattinson and Zendaya. So we'll have more to talk about here in a couple of weeks with movies that are recent. But go over to filmseizure.com. That's where you can find all of the places that you can follow us on social media, as well as where you can subscribe to the various podcast sites that we are hosted on. You can also find all of our past episodes directly from there. Next week, we are doing a regular episode, and it kind of is the finish of our Halloween in April theme. And Chuck has chosen for us American Psycho. Speaking of Christian Bale, hey, maybe the movie that made him a superstar. So be sure to come back next Wednesday, April 22nd, to listen to that episode. this upcoming Monday, all same places, filmseizure.com. You can find a new episode of my series Monster Mondays with another episode from the 2000s that I'm talking about, The Descent. I think a very effective cave monster movie. So definitely check that out. Go over to filmseizure.com. You'll find all of that stuff there. This upcoming Friday at my website, bmovieanima.com, I have a review of 1971's Fright. Probably a movie that is more closely related to being a inspiration for Halloween some years later than any other movie that you could think of from the 70s. So definitely go over to my website if you want to know more about that. bmovieanima.com is that site. So until next week, when we talk about Christian Bale some more with American Psycho, I am Geoff Arbuckle, and you have been listening to Film Seizure.